I'm not Aaron, in case you didn't realize that. I'm a lot better looking than he is. So, and you can tell him I said that if you'd like. But Aaron sent me a text early morning, maybe right before lunch. Looks like he might have ate something that didn't sit too well with him. That's about all we're going to go on that, I guess. But he's having some issues tonight, so but we wanted to press on, and he called and asked me to lead tonight the message, and I said, man, you bet, because anytime I get the opportunity to share, I take that opportunity. Now here's the thing, you guys probably don't know me from a can of paint, so let me tell you who I am real quick. Doug Pruitt, our pastor, when I was a kid, he lived right across the street from me. We lived on Welford Drive in Little Rock, and we used to throw rocks at each other. And he hit me on the head one time with a rock, and I whelped up real big, and I kind of got upset with him about that, and I threw one back at him, and I hoped I whelped his head. But I don't know that happened. But he lived across the street from me, and I've known Doug and Nancy a long, long time. And I was in full-time vocational ministry for probably more than about 15 years before getting a real job, so to speak. But Aaron's daddy-in-law is one of my best friends in all the world, Randy Brantley. So he's just one of my best friends. And at a very difficult time in my life, boy, Randy Brantley was there to support me and to help me. So I loved him to death. But I recently served as the worship leader at the Markham Street Baptist Church in Little Rock. But that church is, and if you think about Markham Street, pray for them. But that's a situation where I felt that that's not where God wanted me to be at that time. And I've got a 17-year-old daughter, Bay. Y'all probably know Bay. If you don't know Bay, that's okay. She's kind of quiet. We call her Little Bay. And was really looking for a place for Little Bay to plug in, to have some Christian, what do we call it, socializing? Can we say that? I want her to be around Christian kids and build relationships. I grew up in youth ministry. I grew up, I just wanted her to have that experience. So we kind of shopped around, and Midtown's kind of where we landed because of my relationship with Doug, my relationship with Josh and these guys, even with Carol. So we just kind of planted here and just praying and asking God to show us what He'd have for us to do. And we really believe as a family right now that this is where God's called us to serve and to be. So that's why we're here. All right. But tonight, guys, I just got I got a story that I want to tell you. Okay, and it's a biblical story, and it's since Aaron gave me all this time to prepare, he called me today. So since I had all this time to prepare, I had to kind of dig back into to something I knew, something I had done before, and this is something that I have probably shared more often in my own personal ministry than I have anything else, because it's my favorite Bible story, and it's my favorite chapter of the Bible. It really is. And I'm talking about Daniel chapter 3. Now, we're going to do something tonight. Thank you, appreciate it. Y'all, they're screaming for me. That's all right. Get that everywhere I go. But I'm going to do something tonight that we hadn't done since I've been here. All right. And what I want to do is I want to read an entire chapter in the Bible. All right. Now, don't worry. It's only about 28, 29 verses long. But it's Daniel chapter 3. And when I read this to you, I bet you're going to recognize the story. So if you recognize the story, that's great. If you don't, that's great too. But what I want you to do is listen for the different characters of the story, okay? Listen to the role that these different people played in this story. All right. Now, there is one thing that I want to mention. You know, we just finished a series on parables. Remember that? Y'all remember that? Shake your head like this. Okay, some of you do, some of you were asleep most of the time. But anyway, we just finished a study with Aaron on parables. And what parables are stories, all right? They're stories that portray a spiritual truth. But the story that I want to read to you tonight is not a parable, but this is historical, okay? We're looking at Daniel chapter 3, and everything that we're about to read is not a story to help us understand. Well, it is a story to help us understand spiritual things, but the events that we're going to read about actually took place, okay? This is historical, and it's in Daniel chapter 3. Are you there with me? Say, I'm there with you.
I'm there.
Say, somebody say I'm not there. TikTok, you say you're not there? All right, Daniel chapter 3. Now stay with me. Listen to the characters, okay? I'm going to try to read this as interestingly as humanly possible, okay? But listen for the different characters. Daniel chapter 3. Here we go. Everybody say go. Go. Everybody say go. Go. All right, here we go. King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide and set it up on the plain of Dura in a province of Babylon. Then he sent messages to the high officers, officials, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the provincial officials to come to the dedication of the statue that he had set up. So all these officials came and stood before the statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then the herald shouted out, "People of all races and nations and languages, listen to the king's command. When you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipes, and other musical instruments, bow to the ground to worship King Nebuchadnezzar's gold statue. Anyone who refuses to obey will immediately be thrown into the fiery furnace." So at the sound of the musical instruments, all the people, whatever their race or nation or language, bowed to the ground and worshiped the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. But some of the astrologers went to the king and informed on the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "Long live the king. You issued a decree requiring that all people bow down and worship the gold statue when they hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and other musical instruments. That decree also states that those who refuse to obey must be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whom you have put in charge of the province of Babylon. They pay no attention to you, your majesty. They refuse to serve your gods and do not worship the gold statue that you set up." Tattletales. Then King Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage and ordered that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought before him. When they were brought in, Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, guys, that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you refuse to serve my gods or to worship the gold statue that I've set up? I will give you one more chance. One more chance to bow down and worship the statue that I've made. And when you hear the sound of the musical instruments," I got a band going here, "but if you refuse, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. And then what God," now listen to what he says. He says, "And then what God will be able to rescue you from my power?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, "Oh, Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we're thrown into a blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue that you set up." Better get a summer suit on and a fan in your hand. Sounds like we're headed to a hot climate. Nebuchadnezzar was so furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face became distorted with rage. Have you ever made your parents so mad that their face was distorted with rage? Luke, he's shaking his head. Yeah. I have.
My mom just beat me with a football.
Uh-oh, beamed you with a football. That's what I'm talking about. All right. Yeah. King Nebuchadnezzar here, he got so mad that it says his face became distorted with rage. He commanded that the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than usual. Then he ordered some of the strongest men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So they tied them up, they threw them in the furnace, fully dressed, in their pants, turbans, robes, and other garments. And because the king, in his anger, he demanded such a hot fire in the furnace that the flames killed the soldiers as they threw the 3 men in. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, securely tied, fell into the roaring flames. But suddenly, Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in amazement and exclaimed to his advisors, "Didn't we tie up 3 men and throw them into the furnace?" "Yes, your majesty, we certainly did," they replied. "Look," Nebuchadnezzar shouted, "I see 4 men, unbound, walking around in the fire unharmed, and the 4th looks like a god." Then Nebuchadnezzar came as close as he could to the door of the flaming furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped out of the fire. Then the high officers, officials, governors, and advisors crowded around them and saw that the fire had not touched them. Not a hair on their heads was singed, and their clothing was not scorched. They didn't even smell like smoke. Wow. Then Nebuchadnezzar praised to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angels to rescue his servants who trusted in him. They defied the king's command and were willing to die rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make this decree: if any people, whatever their race or nation or language, speak a word against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they will be torn limb from limb, and their houses will be turned into heaps of rubble. There is no other God who can rescue like this. Verse 30 here. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to even higher positions in the province of Babylon. Now, folks, that's a true story. That actually happened. Sometime around probably 650, 800 BC. These 4 Jewish, Hebrew men, young men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, were thrown into this fiery furnace and lived to tell about it. Pretty amazing story when you think about it. Because it's true. You know, sometimes when we look at these biblical accounts of these events, especially in the Old Testament, we forget that these are actually real events. Take, for example, when Moses stood before the Red Sea and the Red Sea parted and the people of God walked across on dry land. That's a good story. It makes a good movie. I don't know if you've seen that or not. But folks, that really happened. The power of God demonstrated. It blows my mind. And here's the question, guys. Does it blow your mind? Are we looking for the power of God to be unleashed in our lives? I know you're teenagers. All right? I hesitate to use the word kids, but y'all got to remember I'm half 100 plus 2 years old. So you guys are kids to me. I know you guys are kids, and you feel like you got your whole life ahead of you, and you probably do. But I just want you to know, even as a teenager, man, you can experience the power of God. The same power of God that brought Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego right out of the fire is the same power of God that can make a difference in your life. And do what?
He said it bade you good.
Yeah, I'm going to say that probably again. It's just in my mind, you know, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But anyway, stay with me. This is a very familiar Bible story. It's one of my favorites in the Old Testament. And by the way, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were friends of Daniel. Now, Daniel's, the book of Daniel, right? Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were Hebrews that were in captive in Babylon. And Daniel had interpreted some dreams for King Nebuchadnezzar, and that's why these guys got promoted up. All right? Not a lot of backstory on that, but just to kind of give you an idea of what we're talking about here. And you know, Daniel's name, it actually means God is my judge. That's what Daniel means. So reading through the book of Daniel, which includes his life, it includes prophecies, you can see why his name fits him. Because Daniel was committed to doing what was right, no matter who it displeased, as long as it pleased God. Did you hear what I said? All right? So, we clearly see Daniel's influence in the lives of these three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. As we read in Daniel chapter 3, and the account of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they too were committed to doing what was right, no matter who it displeased, as long as it pleased God. So the arrogant King Nebuchadnezzar, what's he doing? He's building this 90-foot tall golden image. And folks, historians tell us that the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar set up was probably a statue of himself. Now, y'all heard of North Korea? All right, not a real good place, and probably wouldn't visit there if I were you. Probably not a good vacation spot. But Kim Jong-un, whatever his name is, all right, his daddy was leader before him, and his granddaddy was leader before him. And if you ever do go to North Korea, there's right there in the middle of the capital city of the nation, there are two huge statues of Kim Jong-un's granddaddy and his daddy just standing there. And it's a national holiday that on their birthdays, people of Korea are required to come to those statues and bow and offer gifts and leave flowers at these statues. Every time I look at that and see a story about that, I think of Babylon and King Nebuchadnezzar. Because he did the same thing. King Nebuchadnezzar set up this huge golden statue of himself and then decreed that everybody should worship him. Arrogant. Then he heralded, it says in verse 4, it says, people of all races and nations, listen to the king's command. When you hear the sound of the band, bow to the ground and worship the gold statue. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were followers of the one and only true God. They did not recognize King Nebuchadnezzar and his golden image as a god. Verse 7 says, so at the sound of the musical instruments, all the people, whatever their race and nation, bowed to the ground and worshiped the gold statue. Verse 12 says, but there are some Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, these were the astrologers that were tattletelling, whom you have put in charge of the province of Babylon. They pay no attention to you, your majesty. They refuse to serve your gods and do not worship the gold statue that you've set up. Now get that. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, while the whole nation was bowing down, they took a stand. They stood when everybody else was bowing down. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were doing what was right, no matter who it displeased, as long as it pleased God. What about you guys? What about you when you're at school? What about you when you're running around? The things that you do, the thoughts that you have, is it your heart's desire to do what's right, even if it displeases people, as long as it pleases God? I'm going to tell you, when I was your age, that wasn't always true of me. And can I let you in on a little secret? Even at my age, it's not always true. The stand that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego took was one of real faith, one of real courage. And in the face of certain death, the fiery furnace, they stood strong for what was right no matter what. The faith they had did not waver, but they trusted in the saving power of God completely. Look what it says in verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego applied. O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But listen to what he says now. Listen to this, guys. Listen to this. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue that you've set up. Guys, when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were bound up, and those huge guards picked them up to throw them into the fiery furnace, they did not know that they were going to survive. Okay? They knew that the God they served was able, but they didn't know if God was going to actually save them from that fiery furnace. And I can guarantee you they flinched like a Jew Jiminy Jigger when they were thrown into that fire. They flinched up real bad and hit the ground. And they thought, oh, and then, oh, it's cool. Waving their hands through the fire. And then they realized they're in the presence of God Himself. And they just start having a revival right there in the fiery furnace. You know, praising God. And have you ever put your finger through a candle like this and it makes your finger kind of black? You can admit it. I know you've done it. I've done it. Yeah, I know. But they were like jumping through the fire with their whole bodies. And it what? Man. And guys, think about this. They were willing to do what's right, even though it could have cost them their life. But if he doesn't. So here's a challenge, and I'm about to get to the message here in a minute, I promise. But here's the challenge. Are you willing? Are you willing to serve Him? Are you willing to take a stand for the Lord Jesus Christ wherever you are, whoever you're with? Even if it means you're not going to fit in? Even if it means it's going to cost you something? That's the kind of faith Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had. So this sets the scene for the next moments in the lives of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So tonight, real quickly, all right, here we go. There's 4 things that I want us to consider as we look at how when the entire nation of Babylon was bowing down to a false god, these Hebrew young men took a stand in the face of death itself. The first thing I want you to write it down, your first blank there, is the pressure to compromise never goes away. The pressure to compromise never goes away. Verse 13 says that Nebuchadnezzar, you remember, he flew into that rage, right? His face got all distorted, remember? And he said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you've refused to serve my gods or worship the gold statue I set up. And then verse 15, it says, I'm going to give you one more chance. I used to always, when I was a kid, getting in trouble, I'd always ask my dad, can I please just have one more chance? Give me one more chance. He never did. King Nebuchadnezzar, he's giving Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego something my dad never gave me. He's giving them another chance. He's saying, hey guys, if you'll bow down, then we'll start all over and we'll go forward. Guys, remember, when it comes to taking a stand for the Lord Jesus Christ, wherever you are, whoever you're with, number one, the pressure to compromise never goes away. And compromise means, guys, that we accept something, we accept standards that are lower than desirable. Nebuchadnezzar was pressuring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to compromise their faith, to give in, to go with the flow. But they declined. I encourage you to do the same. You know, it's easy to flow downriver. It's hard to swim upstream. Okay? But I'm telling you, when God calls you to swim upstream, start swimming. And swim upstream at all cost. Because we're going to find out in just a minute, we are only under the protection of God's love when we're doing God's will. Are you with me? All right. Number 2. Not only is the pressure to compromise that never goes away, but number 2, trusting God is always more important than personal comfort. Trusting God is always more important than personal comfort. Verse 16 says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they replied, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. And then down in verse 18, he says, in verse 17, he says, the God we serve is able to deliver us and save us. Verse 18, he says, but even if he doesn't save us, we're still not going to bow down. All right? Trusting God is always more important than personal comfort. Remember what I said? They got bound up and they were thrown into this fiery furnace, and they really had no idea until they hit the bottom of that furnace and they realized they were still alive that God was actually going to save them. Okay? Trusting God. They were in an uncomfortable situation. Can you imagine that the whole nation is bowing down, but yet they're going to... I don't even like that song. You know, they're standing up when everybody else is bowing down. They sacrifice their own comfort. And guys, you got to do the same thing. We as children of God who serve a loving God, there are times when living for Him, it's going to be a little uncomfortable sometimes. And that's okay. That's the way it's supposed to be. I'm glad I don't get along with the things of the world sometimes. You know, I was a fireman for a little while. I was a youth pastor at Second Baptist Church in West Helena, Arkansas, and at the same time I was auxiliary fireman on the West Helena Fire Department. And I used to remember when I'd go down to the fire department, you know, the firemen there would be they'd be probably doing something that they knew I wouldn't want to be a part of, and all of a sudden the subject matter that they were talking about changed. One time Captain Ryan went, hey guys, shh, shh, shh. You know, don't, Mike, you know, because the youth pastor had walked into the building, things changed. And to be honest with you, I was never offended by that. Because I was glad that my witness for the Lord was as such that they knew where I stood, even as uncomfortable as it was. Are you with me? Guys, the pressure to compromise never goes away. Trusting God is always more important than personal comfort. Number 3, write it down. God will never leave you on your own. God will never leave you on your own. Verse 24 says, but suddenly Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in amazement. Didn't we tie up 3 men and throw them in the fiery furnace? Yes, we certainly did. King Nebuchadnezzar said, I see 4. They're unbound. They're walking around in the fire unharmed. And the 4th looks like a god. They came out of the fire. King Nebuchadnezzar summoned them out of the fire. The fire didn't touch them. It didn't singe a hair on their head. And they didn't even smell like smoke. Now, folks, you guys probably can't relate to what I'm about to tell you. But when I was a kid, I had a little girlfriend that worked at Pike Lanes in North Little Rock, Arkansas. And we used to go down there and go bowling. Okay? Now, that was back in the mid-'80s. All right? And in the mid-'80s, when you went into a bowling alley, it was pretty much a Marlboro man place. Everybody had a cigarette and was lit up. You know? Put that down, they're their turn to bowl. They bowl, they come back, and they, you know, the whole place had a haze. And it wasn't because of a haze machine and a light show. It was because of cigarettes. And you couldn't go into Pike Lanes without coming out of there smelling like a pack of Marlboro Lights. You just couldn't do it. And I remember my dad told me one time, don't you go that bowling alley tonight, son. But I had to go see Christy. I had to. So I went there, and I stayed for a little while, and I went home. My dad said, you went to the bowling alley, didn't you? It's because I smelled like it. I couldn't even walk into Pike Lanes for just a few moments and come out not smelling like smoke. And here Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are. They had a worship service in the fire. They didn't get burned. The hair on their head didn't get singed. Now, that's not a big deal with me, but with y'all, that's probably a big deal. But then number 3, they didn't even smell like smoke. The God we serve, guys, is able to deliver us. God will never leave you on your own. The reason the fire didn't touch them, the reason their hair didn't get burned, the reason they didn't smell like smoke is because that was the power of God unleashed in their life. They were in the presence of God. They weren't by themselves. If they had been in that fire by themselves, they would have burned up. But they weren't. They were in the presence of God. And young people, as long as you are walking with the Lord and you're staying with Him and you're serving Him, you're loving Him, you want to please Him, then you are going to be under the umbrella of God's protection and love. And it doesn't matter what storms of life come. It doesn't matter what fires of the world are thrown at you. God is more powerful than the things of the world. So trust in Him and know that you're never alone. The pressure to compromise never goes away. Trusting God is always more important than personal comfort. God never leaves you on your own. And last but definitely not least, God's presence is greater than you could ever imagine. God's presence, write it down, is greater than you could ever imagine. Isaiah 43:2 says that when you go through deep waters, I will be with you. When you go through rivers of difficulty, you will not drown. When you walk through the fire of oppression, you will not be burned up. The flames will not consume you. God's presence is greater than you could ever imagine. Now, guys, this is history. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were actually thrown into a fiery furnace. I know I've said that about 100 times now, right? Okay? Now, we accept it because it's a Bible story we know and that we've heard before. But I just want you to think about that for a minute. Just think about that. Have you ever had an experience in your life that even comes close to that? I haven't. The fire did not consume them. And the reason the fire didn't consume them is because they were in the presence of our great God. Now, guys, if you want the power of God unleashed in your life, all right, then you're going to have a relationship with Him. You're going to have to stay close to Him. You're going to have to get to know Him. And we get to know Him through His Word, through His church, and just talking to Him. Just talk to Him. Unleash this great power in your life. And I promise you guys that the flames of the world, it's going to be uncomfortable sometimes, but you are an overcomer in Christ. So what does this mean for me? And we're done. What does this mean for me? How did Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stand when everyone else was bowing? How are you going to stand for what is right when the whole world is going a different direction? Well, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego encourage us with these three things. So this is what this means for you and me. Number one, folks, we have to make the right choice. You have to make right decisions. Joshua 24:15 says, "But if you refuse to serve the Lord, then choose today whom you will serve. Would you prefer the gods of your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates? Or will it be the gods of the Amorites in whose land you now live? But as for me and my house, as for me and my family, we will serve the Lord." Guys, make the right choices. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they made the right choice. The whole nation was bowing down, but they stood. Number two, have a no matter what commitment. Have a no matter what commitment. The God whom we serve is able to save us, they said. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But even if He doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue that you've set up. Wherever you go, guys, whoever you're with, all right? If it's uncomfortable, serve Him. Trust Him. Be committed to that. Have that no matter what commitment. And last, number three, be strong with courage. Be strong with courage. Deuteronomy 31:6 says, "So be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid, and do not panic before them, before the Lord your God will personally go ahead of you. He will neither fail you nor abandon you." And guys, that is a tremendous promise of God, that when we are in Him and we're serving Him, He will never abandon us. But He's right there with us. Amen? Amen. 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 Y'all better. Now, we're about to go to our small groups, amen. Before we do that, I just want you to consider and reflect on things. Think about you. Don't think about that person sitting next to you, but think about you. All right? Do you have a faith like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do you? Folks, I'm just here to tell you that we got to start making right choices. We've got to have a no matter what commitment. And folks, we got to be strong and we got to be courageous, even if it's uncomfortable. And I don't care if you're 12 years old, 15 years old, 18 years old, or half 100 plus 2 years old. That's 52 for those of you that are math challenged, as I was and as I am. But it doesn't matter how old we are. Okay? It doesn't matter. We still are living in this world, and we still face the pressures of compromise. We still face the storms and the fires of the world. But I just want you to know that God has a plan for each and every one of us. And His plan is to know you and for you to make Him known wherever you go, whoever you're with. Would you commit to doing that? Nobody here is perfect. I'm not. Chad's not. Even though you probably think he is, he's not. But you know what? God doesn't expect perfection. That's why Jesus died on the cross, because God accepts our imperfection. All He asks is that we accept His love, His forgiveness. And then once we accept that, you know what? All we have to do is our best. And when we fail, God's going to be right there. He's not going to abandon us. And He's going to bring us back. Let's pray, okay?